Aita for wanting to give up my son after discovering he isn't mine? The situation is nothing short of a clusterfuck. I'm angry, depressed, and sad, and I don't know what to do. Throw away. I, 32 am shattered and don't know where to turn. My wife passed away last month, only 7 months after giving birth to our son. She developed peripartum cardiomyopathy, a rare and severe form of heart failure that can occur in the months following childbirth. Despite the doctor's best efforts, she didn't survive. Losing her so suddenly has left me heartbroken and in a state of constant grief. 3 weeks ago, my wife's best friend came over to visit. She was visibly nervous and eventually told me she had something sensitive to share. After some hesitation, she revealed that my wife had confided in her that she'd been unfaithful around the time our son was conceived and that there was a chance he might not be mine. I was stunned and angry. My wife's best friend was telling me this only weeks after my wife's death, and it felt like an attempt to tarnish her memory. I couldn't believe it. I told her to leave and not to come back, convinced she was lying or trying to shift blame onto me somehow. The whole thing felt like a betrayal, and I tried to push the thought out of my mind. But once the idea was planted, it wouldn't go away. I kept wondering, what if she was telling the truth? After days of tormenting myself with this possibility, I decided to get a DNA test. It wasn't an easy decision, I felt guilty for even considering it, but I needed closure. Yesterday, the results came back. My worst fears were confirmed, my son isn't biologically mine. Now, I'm in turmoil. I loved my wife, and I wanted to believe our son was a piece of her and me together. But knowing he's not biologically mine has left me feeling lost and betrayed. I keep looking at him, trying to feel the same bond, but the pain of my wife's infidelity is so fresh, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to move past it. I feel awful even considering it, but I don't know if I can raise him on my own. The betrayal I feel is overwhelming, and I don't know if I'm capable of giving him the love and care he deserves. It's breaking my heart, and I feel like a failure, but I also feel like I'm not equipped to give him the life he deserves. Aita? Edit, I hadn't thought of contacting the friend, but I will now. The replies have really solidified what I have been feeling. The child is innocent, but I don't think I'd be able to love or care for him as well as I should. Informing the family will be my first step, then contacting the AP, if possible. Adoption is going to be my last resort. Many of you may believe I'm a monster, but put yourself in my situation, I hope you all understand. After her death, I was drowning in grief. The days blurred together as I struggled to adjust to life as a single father, trying to keep it together for the sake of my son. I felt like a piece of me had been ripped away. My son became my only source of comfort, a reminder of her, a piece of her that I could still hold on to. I told myself that I'd get through this, for him, because that's what she would have wanted. But then, 3 weeks ago, something happened that changed everything. One afternoon, my wife's best friend came by the house to check in on me and the baby. She'd been close with my wife since college, and I'd always considered her a part of the family. She'd been supportive since my wife's passing, visiting regularly to help with the baby and offer whatever support she could. I thought she was just there to help me cope, to be a shoulder to lean on. But that day, there was something different about her. She seemed nervous, fidgeting as we sat down in the living room. I could tell she wanted to say something, but she kept hesitating, and the silence started to feel heavy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she looked me straight in the eye and said there was something she needed to tell me, something my wife had confessed to her in confidence. She told me that my wife had been unfaithful around the time our son was conceived and that there was a chance he wasn't mine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Here I was, grieving the love of my life, barely able to function, and now I was being told that she had betrayed me? My initial reaction was anger, anger at her friend for saying something so horrible, anger at the timing, anger at the world for piling this on top of everything else I was going through. I couldn't even process it. I told her to leave, convinced she was lying or that there had been some misunderstanding. It felt like an attack on my wife's memory, a way to tarnish her image when she wasn't even here to defend herself. But even after she left, the seed of doubt had been planted, and it started to grow. Over the following days, I couldn't get it out of my mind. Every time I looked at my son, the words echoed in my head, "There's a chance he isn't mine." I started to notice every little detail about him, analyzing his features, searching for some sign that he was, in fact, my biological child. But I realized that no matter how hard I looked, I wouldn't find the answer without certainty. It was a decision that weighed heavily on me, and I tortured myself with it for days. I felt guilty just thinking about it, like I was betraying my wife's memory, like I was betraying my son. But the uncertainty was eating me alive. I was losing sleep, I couldn't concentrate, and I could feel myself spiraling into a dark place. I realized that if I didn't find out the truth, I'd drive myself crazy. So I ordered a DNA test. I told myself it was just for closure, that I needed this one final piece of clarity so I could move forward. When the results finally came in, my worst fears were confirmed. My son wasn't biologically mine. Reading those words felt like being punched in the gut. I had been clinging to the hope that her friend had been wrong, that maybe it had just been a moment of doubt or insecurity. But there it was, in black and white. The child I had been raising, the child I had promised to care for in her memory, wasn't mine. After getting the results, I felt like I was in freefall. The grief from losing my wife hadn't even begun to fade, and now it was layered with a betrayal so deep I didn't know if I could ever recover. I felt like I'd been living a lie, that the life we'd built together had cracks I'd never noticed. Every time I looked at my son, I felt this overwhelming mixture of emotions. I wanted to love him the way I had before, but now there was this wall between us, a reminder of my wife's unfaithfulness. I tried to force myself to feel the same connection, but it was as if something inside me had broken. I felt so conflicted. I knew that my son was innocent in all of this, that he hadn't asked to be born into this mess. But every time I held him, I felt a wave of resentment and anger, not toward him, but toward my wife for putting me in this position, for leaving me to deal with the consequences of her choices. I felt lost, angry, and deeply ashamed. Here I was, a grown man, unable to give this child the love he deserved. As the days passed, I began to consider something I never thought I would: giving him up. The thought of it broke my heart, and every time it crossed my mind, I felt like a monster. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could give him the life he deserved. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to look at him without being reminded of the betrayal, of the life I thought I had but never really did. I kept telling myself that he deserved better, that he deserved a father who could love him unconditionally, who didn't have this shadow hanging over every moment. But then, I'd think of my promise to my wife, of the words I'd whispered to her in the hospital, promising to raise him and tell him how wonderful she was. The guilt was unbearable. I thought about reaching out to my wife's family, maybe finding a way for him to stay connected to them, to give him a sense of family even if I couldn't be the one to provide it. Part of me wondered if the man she'd been involved with even knew about the child, if he might want to be a part of his life. But every time I thought about handing him over to someone else, I felt like I was failing my wife's memory, like I was breaking my vow to her. Right now, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do or who to turn to. I know people will judge me, and maybe I deserve it, but I feel like I'm barely surviving. My grief, my anger, my sense of betrayal, it all feels insurmountable, like there's no way out of this pain. Part of me wants to keep my son, to find a way to move past this, to make peace with everything that's happened. But another part of me wonders if that's even possible. Every time I look at him, I'm reminded of the lie, of the life I thought I had but never really did. I'm considering contacting my wife's friend again, trying to find out more about the affair, about the man who might be my son's biological father. Maybe he deserves to know. Maybe he'd want to be involved. I don't know. I'm grasping at straws, trying to find some solution that doesn't leave me feeling like a monster. All I know is that I'm in a situation I never could have imagined, and I don't know how to get out of it. I love my son, or at least, I think I do. But I don't know if I can love him in the way he needs, in the way he deserves. I feel like I'm drowning in guilt and grief, and I'm terrified that no matter what I decide, I'll end up regretting it for the rest of my life. So, Aita for considering giving him up? Am I wrong for wanting an escape from this nightmare, for wanting to move forward without this constant reminder of betrayal? I don't know. I just don't know. Story 2, Aita for losing my composure at a family gathering? This whole incident still has me rattled, and honestly, I feel like I need some outside perspective. I'm usually a pretty chill guy, and I'm not one to overreact or make scenes. I'm 40, with a wonderful partner and a young kid, and as much as I hate to admit it, I'm known for being a bit of a people pleaser. I'm the happy-go-lucky guy in the family, the one everyone can count on to lighten the mood, smooth things over, or help out. I'm usually so laid back that I joke my spirit animal is a ska band, a little quirky, always upbeat, maybe a little too easygoing. But this time, my patience was pushed to the absolute limit, and I ended up losing my cool in front of everyone. The family gathering was meant to be a casual get-together at my parents' place. My brother, let's call him Matt, 30M, was there with his wife, and so were a few other family members. Now, to give a little background, Matt and I have always had a tense relationship. He's the classic younger sibling who never seems to grow out of the prankster phase. I'd like to say it's harmless fun, but Matt has a habit of taking things too far, to the point where it's more obnoxious than playful. Think the kind of pranks that are funny to him but uncomfortable or humiliating for others. Over the years, I've been on the receiving end of his jokes more times than I can count, and while I've mostly tried to laugh it off for the sake of family peace, this time was different. We just arrived at my parents' house, and I had my small, practical bag with me. It's basically a fanny pack, but I've got a lot of essentials packed in there. My keys, my phone, and most importantly, my kids' meds. Our child has some health needs, and I make sure to keep medication on hand at all times. I can't tell you how many times having that bag has saved us in an emergency. So, while it might seem like just a bag, it's not. It's got things that I need quick access to, things that keep my kids safe. When we got to the gathering, I set the bag on a small table by the entrance, just to free up my hands as we settled in and greeted everyone. We weren't even there 10 minutes when I saw Matt walk over to the table, pick up my bag, and casually stroll into another room with it. I watched him do it, clear as day. I figured it was some weird attempt at humor, knowing him, but I couldn't understand why he'd want to mess with something so personal and important. After a few minutes, I made my way to the room he'd gone into, hoping he'd just hand it back with a laugh, or maybe even apologize for messing with something he knew was off limits. When I walked in, he was standing there, leaning against the wall, looking completely casual. I told him I'd seen him take my bag and that I needed it back. He looked at me with this smirk and said, "What bag? I don't have any idea what you're talking about." I stared at him, trying to keep calm. I reminded him that I'd seen him pick it up. His response? He just smiled wider and said, "Go ahead. Tattle on me. No one will believe you, I always win. Go on, see what happens." He shrugged, acting like it was all a joke, and kept insisting he didn't have the bag. At this point, my blood was boiling. This wasn't some harmless prank, he was playing games with something that held my kids' medication. I asked him again, telling him this wasn't funny and that he needed to stop. But he just kept denying he had it, giving me that same smug smile. I didn't know what to do. I knew if I kept pushing, it would escalate, and I really didn't want to make a scene. So, I walked over to the next room where his wife was sitting, trying to keep my voice calm as I explained what had happened and asked for her help. I figured she'd understand, that she'd tell him to knock it off and give it back. But instead, she looked uncomfortable and told me I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic. She went over to talk to Matt, and a few minutes later came back, saying, "He doesn't have it. Just leave him alone, okay?" I was stunned. I felt like I was in some twisted reality where I was the only one seeing what was going on. I could hear Matt laughing from the other room, and then he peeked his head around the corner, smirked, and mouthed, "Told you so." That was it. I could feel the anger boiling over. This wasn't some harmless prank, this was my family's safety he was messing with, and nobody seemed to care. I went back into the main room, gathered my partner and our kid, and told them we were leaving. I was fuming, but I didn't raise my voice. I just said we needed to go, that I couldn't stay. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, the judgment, the confusion, but I couldn't stand to be there another second. A few relatives started murmuring as I gathered our things. I could hear someone whispering, "What's his problem?" and another person muttering something about how I was being over the top. I was holding it together as best as I could, but I knew I wasn't being calm or collected. I was angry, hurt, and frustrated, and I didn't care if people could see it. As we were heading out the door, Matt finally called out to me, holding up the bag with a triumphant grin. "Oh, looking for this?" he said, waving it around like it was a trophy he'd just won. I took it from him without a word, feeling my hands shake with rage. I wanted to scream, to tell him exactly what I thought of him and his ridiculous games, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. He'd just turn it around on me like he always does, making me look like the bad guy for overreacting to his so-called jokes. We left immediately, but the ride home was tense. I felt sick to my stomach, replaying the scene in my head, wondering if I'd done the right thing by walking out, or if I'd somehow made it worse. My partner tried to comfort me, telling me I'd done nothing wrong, but I could still hear those whispers from my family, the disapproving looks. Later that night, I got a series of texts from family members. Some were neutral, just asking if I was okay, while others were clearly taking Matt's side. They said I was too sensitive, that I'd blown things out of proportion, and that my reaction was concerning. A few of them implied that I needed to learn to take a joke, that it was just Matt being Matt. I felt like I was losing my mind. How was this funny? How was it okay to mess with something so personal, something that had my kids' medication? One of my aunts texted me, saying that I should apologize to Matt for ruining the mood at the gathering. She said I'd embarrassed everyone and that I needed to lighten up. Lighten up? This was my child's safety we were talking about, and they wanted me to treat it like a joke. A few people also said they were concerned about my emotional state, that my reaction was so intense it seemed out of character for me. They said they were worried I was under too much stress and that I should take a break to cool down. I couldn't believe it. Suddenly, I was the one with the problem, not the person who'd taken something that didn't belong to him and lied about it to my face. I spent that night questioning everything. Had I really overreacted? Was I in the wrong for wanting to protect my family, for demanding that Matt respect my boundaries? But then I'd think back to his smirk, to the way he taunted me, knowing he was crossing a line and reveling in the chaos he'd created. It wasn't just about the bag or the meds, it was the sheer disrespect, the lack of empathy. He knew what he was doing, and he did it because he knew he could get away with it. And the fact that my family was enabling him, treating his behavior as some harmless quirk, only made it worse. Now I'm left feeling like I have no support. I don't know how to face my family, knowing they think I was wrong for standing up to Matt, for refusing to let him push me around. It feels like I'm caught in a loop, with everyone expecting me to keep the peace, to laugh off his antics like they always do, while I'm left picking up the pieces of my own self-respect. I don't know if there's a way to make them see my side, to understand that this wasn't just Matt being Matt. This was a deliberate act of disrespect, a total disregard for me and my family's safety. I'm exhausted, torn between wanting to confront everyone and just walking away from it all. So, Aita for losing my composure at the family gathering? Did I overreact, or am I right to feel that my brother crossed a line that can't be easily forgiven? I feel like I'm the only one who sees the problem, and I'm honestly not sure if I should have handled things differently. Story 3, my 40F husband, 40M, has been going to therapy to work on his temper, and his therapist reported him to CPS. He's saying he'll no longer go to therapy because of this. How do I keep him engaged in the therapy needed to do the work? So me, 40F, and my husband have been together for about 10 years, married for 5 of them. We have 1 child, 3YM. My husband has always had a short fuse, argumentative, and had challenges managing his anger. It's taken me a long time to convince him to go into therapy. He agreed about a year ago to go. It became clear recently he wasn't being open and honest with his therapist, and I have continually pushed him to be open so he can address his issues. For reference, he's never hit or hurt me or my son. I'd call him more of a yeller and the type that tries to avoid conflict by being loud. This isn't a good dynamic for the home, so I've been on him about talking to someone to help with managing this. In rare instances he has thrown something, never at me or our son. One of these instances was recent, and I told him to be honest with his therapist to help him understand why this is his reaction and to work with him on healthier responses. He had his session this week and asked to increase his sessions. I was relieved that he was honest and knew enough to seek more than the monthly sessions he had. However, today CPS left a card on my door and wants to talk to me regarding concerning behavior with Dad. Clearly, I know who made the report, and so does my husband. I've arranged to meet with them already. But the problem I'm also facing is that my husband, who has been so distrustful of the system and very impacted by the stigma of it, now distrusts it even more. I'm also a bit angry because this specific incident wasn't even anything that would be reported. He threw my son's Play-Doh in the yard after my son played with it on the deck and was refusing to clean it up. I'm also a PhD clinician, so I'm very familiar with the system and very protective of mine and my son's safety and well-being. While my husband's temper is a current challenge, he has been committing to taking steps to work on it. I love him very much and I love our family. As long as he's committing to working on it and changing, I've agreed to be here for support. I've made it clear to him that I will leave if things don't change because his temper and unpredictability are not healthy for our home. However, he's told me he's going to stop going to therapy because this is what happens when he's being honest in session. Any advice on how to keep him engaged? I'm feeling a whole host of emotions, mostly sadness that someone seeking help gets reported for an anger outburst, reinforcing his distrust in the system and convincing him to not be honest in his self-work. Also that the therapist who has told him many times how they are a mandated reporter did not feel the need to tell him he disclosed something they felt obligated to report. I know not required, but I've always operated on that ethical principle with those I've treated. I feel like without his commitment to getting help working on this, our marriage will fail. Story 4, Aita for not supporting my wife financially immediately after divorce papers are served? My wife filed for divorce last week, and as many are, it was surprising. That evening half of all our joint savings, checking, etc. was gone. I took the other half and closed the account next day. In the divorce her requests are fair, $6,000 for what she contributed to our home projects, home taxes, and I keep my home. Totally fine, very fair. Well, I get a call from her the day after asking why there was no money in our account and if I took it. Yes, I took my half and closed. Well, apparently she was going in there to pull funds out because I owed her that $6,000. I did tell her that was fair, but I explained I don't just have $6,000 right now, I had expected split bills in the future, been saving for years, insurance and taxes, etc. It felt weird because we aren't even at the end yet. It was filed last week and I haven't even responded yet. I care for her very much, and she is very kind. Neither of us wants to do any damage. She's looking at $5,000 to get an apartment, deposits, rent, etc., so she was asking for it. Now, I know she has money because she has some savings, and she took her half from our accounts, which was about $6,000 already. I would love to help her, but I feel I need to really be mindful of my own finances going into a long, dark, and isolated winter in the country. It just all caught me off guard with the papers, and while I'll be fine, it'd be a lot of pressure to just fund her new adventure right off the bat. It feels I don't owe anything until the judge signs off and we all agree. I was able to explain my side, and oddly she understood, which is always have to fight for any compromise, but I could feel the frustration of me pushing back on giving money. So now she'd like me to sign and notarize a letter together that says I will have paid her in full by 20 date, March. Our court date isn't until March 1st, but I'm concerned about signing anything. I keep thinking, what if disaster strikes and I get ill, or my car is totaled, or snow load collapses roof? I then have some document saying I owe her, when I can't pay. I care for her a lot, and honestly it hurts knowing how stressed she is and all she's dealing with. It's not easy on anyone. I want to support her, and feel I should start incrementally paying her back if I can, maybe send $1,000 a month or something. It feels like helping her would represent my values of trying to help anyone who is down and out, to create a better way to treat others even if they've caused pain. Foster a world where divorce isn't bitter, but just another journey of life where two people help the others return to being healthy and happy. Aita for not supporting my wife while going through this, or should I really be waiting for judgment to fall? I have no plans of contesting her for the money, but paying now feels weird.